My name is Nathan Blackwood, and I spent 12 years building my father's company into a $75 million empire. I thought I had earned my place. I thought I had proven myself. But last night, over dinner, my father smiled and said 6 words that changed everything. Your brother will take over now. And that was the moment I realized I was never his real son. But if he thought I was going to walk away quietly, he was dead wrong. I sat at the dinner table, surrounded by family that was never truly mine. The air buzzed with quiet conversation, the clinking of wine glasses, the soft hum of laughter. To any outsider, it would have looked like a picture-perfect gathering. But for me, it was the moment my world was rewritten. Your brother will take over now. The words were so casual, so effortless, as if my father, William Blackwood, hadn't just ripped 12 years of my life from my hands. My grip tightened around the stem of my glass, but my face remained unreadable. I had learned a long time ago that showing weakness in this family was a mistake. Across the table, Ryan, the so-called heir, dropped his gaze with feigned humility. But I knew better. He had been waiting for this moment. This wasn't a sudden decision. This had been planned. I forced a smile and raised my glass. To Ryan, I said smoothly, my voice betraying nothing. The room followed my lead, toasting the man who had never worked a day in his life. The man who was about to take everything from me. But not if I had anything to do with it. That night, as I lay awake in my apartment, the weight of my father's betrayal pressed against my chest. It wasn't just about the company, it was about the truth I had always suspected but never dared to say out loud. I wasn't his real son. The pieces clicked together too perfectly. The quiet distance between us growing up, the way he always looked at Ryan with pride but regarded me like an employee. My mother, the only real parent I ever had passed away years ago, taking any answers with her. And now, without her, my father had finally revealed where I stood. I was nothing to him. But what he didn't realize was that Blackwood Logistics wasn't his to give away anymore. I had spent 12 years not just building this company but securing my power within it. I knew every deal, every contract, every weakness. I had been preparing for the day my father underestimated me. And when the sun rose tomorrow, he would realize he had made the biggest mistake of his life. The next morning, I walked into Blackwood Logistics just like I had for the past 12 years. Same building, same polished floors, same employees offering hesitant glances as I passed. But today, everything was different. Today, they weren't looking at their CEO. They were looking at a man who had just been replaced. But I wasn't going anywhere. Before we continue, I want to connect with all of you, my incredible viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop the flag of your country in the comments below and let's see how far the story reaches. Now, let's get back to it. I stepped into my office and shut the door behind me, taking a deep breath. The air was thick with anticipation, but my mind was clear. My father and Ryan would be here soon, expecting an easy transition, expecting me to quietly hand over everything I built. They had no idea what was coming. I sank into my chair and pulled up my computer, skimming through a series of documents I had prepared for this exact moment. Because while my father had been busy giving interviews and Ryan had been busy failing upwards, I had been doing something far more important, securing control. 12 years ago, when Blackwood Logistics was struggling, my father had needed funding. And I had been the one to bring in investors, to sign contracts, to take financial risks that no one else would. In doing so, I had strategically acquired shares. Not all at once. Not enough for him to notice. But slowly, over time, I had positioned myself as the company's largest shareholder. So while my father thought he could hand my life's work to his real son, the truth was he didn't have the authority to do it. At exactly 9 a.m., the door to my office swung open. My father walked in first, his presence commanding as ever, but there was something different in his eyes today. A flicker of uncertainty. Ryan followed behind him, dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than his entire contribution to this company. He smirked as he took a seat across from me, radiating the kind of arrogance only a man who's never had to fight for anything can possess. Nathan, my father started, his voice calm, deliberate. I assume you're aware of the transition happening today. I leaned back, tilting my head slightly. Oh, I'm aware, I said, my tone even. Good. He nodded as if this was all settled. We'll need you to work closely with Ryan during the handover. Make sure he understands the operations before you officially step aside. Step aside? I almost laughed. Instead, I reached for my remote and clicked a button. The massive screen on my office wall lit up, displaying one document that would change the course of this conversation. The executive shareholder agreement. My father's eyes flickered to the screen, and for the first time, I saw it. The hesitation. The creeping realization that he had miscalculated. Ryan, on the other hand, let out a scoff. What is this? He said, his irritation bleeding through. I turned to him with a knowing smirk. A legal document, I said. One that clearly states that any transfer of executive power requires the approval of the majority shareholder. I paused for effect, then looked directly at my father. Which, by the way, is me. Silence. A long, thick silence that stretched across the room as my father processed what had just happened. That's impossible, Ryan muttered, his face paling. I arched an eyebrow. Is it? I clicked again, pulling up a timeline of stock transfers and contractual agreements. Remember when you needed capital for expansion in 2015? I asked my father. You signed over 15% of your shares to me in exchange for my investment. I clicked again. And then in 2018, during that legal battle, another 10% was transferred under my name. Another click. That, plus my original stake, brings me to 51%. I let the weight of my words sink in. I was the majority owner of Blackwood Logistics. Ryan shot to his feet. You're lying, he snapped. Dad, tell him he's lying. But my father said nothing, because he knew I wasn't lying. I stood slowly, adjusting my cuffs, looking between the two men who had assumed I would roll over and accept my fate. I'm not here to argue, I said smoothly. I'm here to tell you how this is going to go. I turned to Ryan first. You have two options, I said. One, you stay in the company but not as CEO. You'll take on a minor advisory role, a generous salary, and you'll answer to me. Ryan clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. Or, I continued, you take a buyout. You walk away with a respectable settlement, and you go find something else to ruin. His face turned red with rage. You can't do this, he hissed. I leaned in slightly, dropping my voice just enough to make sure he felt the weight of my next words. I already did. Ryan turned to my father, but for the first time in his life, William Blackwood had no answer. He had spent years believing that bloodline mattered more than ability, that his real son would inherit his empire and his mistake, would simply step aside. He had underestimated me, and now he was paying for that mistake. My father finally exhaled, shaking his head in quiet disbelief. He looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time, and then, with a slow nod, he finally accepted the truth. This company was never his to give away. It was mine, and I had just made damn sure that no one could ever take it from me again. The moment my father and Ryan walked out of my office, I knew this war was far from over. I had outmaneuvered them in the boardroom, but men like William Blackwood didn't go down quietly. And Ryan, he wasn't just going to walk away. He was going to fight, and I was ready for him. By noon, the first attack came. Subtle but effective. A whisper campaign had already begun within the company. Some employees who had once been loyal to me suddenly avoided eye contact in the hallways. Others whispered in hushed voices, pretending not to notice when I passed by. Then came the leaks to the press. Nathan Blackwood's strong-arms family in brutal corporate takeover. A betrayal from within, Blackwood heir forced out by adopted brother. Adopted. So that was their play. They weren't just painting me as ruthless. They were making me an outsider. A man who never should have had a stake in the family business to begin with. It was clever, calculated, and it might have worked if I hadn't already planned for this exact moment. I made one phone call. An hour later, a new article hit the headlines. The real story behind Blackwood Logistics, how Nathan Blackwood saved a failing empire. It exposed everything. Every failed deal Ryan had touched. Every reckless decision my father had covered up. Every time I had stepped in to clean up their mess. By the end of the day, investors were calling me, not them. The board members who had been on the fence suddenly remembered where their loyalty should lie. And Ryan, he was drowning in his own failures. That night, my father called me. For the first time in years, his voice didn't hold its usual authority. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. I let out a slow breath, gripping my phone tighter. Neither did you. Silence stretched between us. It was never about business, was it? I asked finally. You never planned to let me have it, no matter what I did. Another pause. Then, with a voice barely above a whisper, he admitted the truth. You were never meant to be part of this family. It should have hurt, but instead, I felt nothing at all. Because in the end, it didn't matter. I had spent 12 years fighting for my place, but now I realized I had already won. The next morning, Ryan was gone. He had taken the buyout and disappeared. His last desperate attempt to take the company down with him utterly failed. My father? He resigned from the board by the end of the month. And me? I wasn't just the CEO. I wasn't just the man who took over Blackwood Logistics. I was the man who built it. And now it was mine. At its core, this story isn't just about business, betrayal, or power. It's about something deeper. It's about self-worth. About proving that blood isn't the only thing that defines family. About understanding that sometimes, no matter how hard you fight for acceptance, the only validation you truly need comes from yourself. Nathan spent 12 years believing that if he worked hard enough, sacrificed enough, he would finally be seen as worthy. But in the end, his father's approval was never meant for him. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest lesson of all. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think? Was Nathan right to fight back? Or should he have walked away? Drop a 2 in the comments if you liked the story, or a 7 if you didn't. And if you love stories filled with twists, drama, and power plays, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Mr.HeartVibes. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Let's grow this community together, because trust me, there's more to come.